Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Noah here breaking down the NFL Showdown slate on Draftkings for Monday Night Football for Week 13. For this Monday night game, we got a really good game tonight, or at least on Monday night. I'm recording this on Sunday afternoon. We got a game between the Vikings and the Seahawks on Monday night. Should make for a really fun game to watch. Should make for another pretty fun Showdown slate. These Showdown slates for these primetime games lately have been really fun to play because of the good games that we've had. With it being like towards the end of the season, you're getting like the best games on primetime. So should make for a really fun Showdown slate. Before we get started with this video, I do want to let you guys know that my Patreon page is officially live. There is a link down in the description. You guys can check it out. I've been hyping up my Patreon page for a while now. I let you guys know like 2 or 3 weeks ago that I was starting one. It is the beginning of December. That's when I said I was going to launch the page. So it is officially live by the time you're watching this video. I'm recording this on like 5:30 or 6 o'clock Eastern on Sunday night. I'm probably going to make this video public around 9:30, somewhere in that time range, maybe like later, maybe like 10 o'clock on Sunday night. Once the video goes public and once you're able to see this video, my Patreon will be officially live. So you can check it out down in the description, see all that I'm offering. I have packages available for both NFL and NBA. You can get both sports combined for a like cheaper bundled price. I do have content available for the Showdown slates. Those will be included in my NFL packages. So, or at least for the Monday night and Thursday night, I won't have content for the Sunday night Showdown, but for the Monday night and Thursday night Showdowns, I will have a written article that I write up myself where I kind of talk about my favorite plays, how I feel you guys should be building your lineups, who are the best plays, best way to construct your lineup. So all that content can be found over on Patreon. Just click the link down in the description. You guys can check it out. If you have any questions about my Patreon page, you can hit me up on Twitter. You can message me over on Patreon. They do have a messaging system. You can leave a comment down below in the comment section. Just feel free to let me know any comments, questions you have. Don't feel scared to ask any questions. Before we do get started though, guys, also with the Patreon, I want to let you guys know that I would appreciate it if you would drop a like. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you have not yet. Click that notification bell so that way you get notified every time I upload. As always, you can follow me on Twitter. Link is down in the description as well, at DFS by Noah. If you need to contact me regarding the Patreon or just you have questions in general you need to ask me, you can do so on Twitter. You can also just stay in touch with me over on Twitter. I am very active over there. But let's go ahead and run through this Showdown slate real quick. We'll talk about like the plays at each position. We'll hit on the 2 quarterbacks. We'll talk about the running backs, receivers, just the pass catchers, and then we'll talk about just values I see, whether we should be looking to like the kickers or the defenses. So starting off with the quarterbacks, we got Russell Wilson at 10,800, Kirk Cousins at 9,000. So obviously choosing between the 2 quarterbacks, I mean, Russell Wilson's the better QB in this game. He's got more fantasy upside. He is almost $2,000 more expensive, but I feel like trying to find that $2,000 is probably going to make the most sense here. It's not the best matchup. I mean, the Vikings do have a very solid defense, but in this game at home in prime time, I do expect Russell Wilson to play very well. I mean, this is one of the best fantasy QBs this season. We've seen so far this season, like, Wilson's not shown a ton of upside just because he's not in a ton of competitive games. Like, we've seen a lot this season when the Seahawks kind of get ahead. They just want to run the ball as much as they can. I don't expect that to be the case here. I mean, this game only has a 3-point spread. Right now, the total is at 49.5, so it is projected to be a relatively high-scoring game. Should be close as well. I think we're going to get probably 35, 40 pass attempts from Russell Wilson. We know how much upside he has for fantasy. He's a very efficient quarterback. He has a lot of rushing upside as well. He can get you 40, 50 rushing yards. So I like Russell Wilson a ton. I do prefer him over Kirk Cousins. There is some cheap value available on this Showdown slate that I like a lot. So I think it's going to be pretty easy to get both Wilson and Cousins together. And I usually try and do that if possible. I like to play both quarterbacks if I can, as long as I'm not sacrificing too much in my lineup. Kirk Cousins, we saw kind of get off to a really slow start to begin the season. The Vikings weren't letting him throw the ball a ton. I mean, he wasn't throwing the ball much. The Vikings and the Seahawks are kind of similar. Like, if they get ahead, both teams just want to run the ball as much as they can. Like I said, I expect this to be a close game. Should be competitive, should be high scoring. So we're probably going to get 35, 40 pass attempts from both quarterbacks. Cousins is firmly in play as well. I do prefer Russell Wilson if I just have to choose one quarterback. But obviously, when we talk about some of the value that I like, we'll look at some roster builds as well towards the end of the video. Should be pretty easy to get both quarterbacks in together. But then moving on to the running backs. On the Vikings side, I mean, Dalvin Cook is clearly the best play on this Showdown slate. He's got the most upside out of any player on this slate. He's got just the most just the most upside. I mean, the guy has 30, 35 point potential. He's going to touch the ball probably 20 times, 20, 25 times. He's going to get a ton of carries. They will use him in the passing game. He's going to get his normal probably 75, 80% of the touches, or 75 to 80% of the snaps, which is what he normally plays. Just looking at running back snaps from the last few weeks, back in week 11, played 81% of the snaps against Denver. He's usually anywhere from high 70s to 80% of the snaps. You'll see maybe Amir Abdullah get some touches. Maybe like they'll give a few touches to Madison or to CJ Ham, but it's going to mainly be Dalvin Cook getting all the work, especially in close competitive games. Dalvin Cook is out there a ton, so I love him on this Showdown slate. He's my top captain. He's the top projected guy. He has the most upside out of any player. You could argue that maybe the matchup's a little tough. I mean, Seattle's been better against the run than they have against the pass this season. They've actually been a really bad pass defense, which is something we haven't seen in past years. Seattle's actually, like, their defense is not nearly as good as it used to be. They're better against the run than the pass, but I still really like Dalvin Cook here. He's just got so much upside. It's really hard to avoid him on this Showdown slate. But I think between the Seahawks running backs, this is where it gets pretty interesting. So you got Chris Carson at 8,400. You also have Rashad Penny at 5,400. And we saw last week against the Eagles, Rashad Penny just kind of went nuts in that game. He had 14 carries for 129 yards, had a rushing touchdown, had a really long rushing touchdown that kind of set him up to have a big game. He also got a lot of work in that game. I want to look at the running back snaps from last week. So Chris Carson was on the field for 54% of the snaps, and Rashad Penny was on the field for 46%. So it was a pretty even split between the two guys. We haven't really seen that in past weeks. I mean, it was in week 10, 96% of the snaps went to Chris Carson, only 4% to Rashad Penny, 85% to Carson, 15%. So it's like most like the whole season, it's been like a pretty even not even, but 70-30 split, 75-25 split between Carson and Penny. Last week we saw a pretty even 50-50 split between the two. With how good Rashad Penny played in that game, with how much Chris Carson struggled, I mean, you already see it right here. Penny may be in line for more consistent work moving forward. Greg Bell of the Tacoma News Tribune reports, we're going to see if we can get more out of Penny, Coach Pete Carroll said on Wednesday. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see a pretty even split in touches between Carson and Rashad Penny. I have a feeling we're going to get sort of a hot hand situation. So if like Carson comes out of the gate and like has a bunch of big runs, they're probably going to leave him in there for most of the game. If he's really struggling and you see Rashad Penny come in the game and get a lot of good runs, a lot of long runs, and he's really efficient and effective, we might see Rashad Penny get more touches. So it's really hard to project which one of these guys to go to. I mean, Carson's obviously the RB1. He's going to be the starter. He should project for the most volume, but there's definitely some risk with Chris Carson, especially if he struggles. I mean, this is a tough matchup as well. Minnesota does have a pretty solid front. I mean, they have a really good run defense. Philly had a really good run defense, and they were able to slow down Chris Carson, only getting 8 carries for 26 yards against them. He had 4 catches for 31 yards as well, but it was a really tough game for Chris Carson. He fumbled in that game. He's fumbled in 3 straight games, which is definitely a concern. I mean, if he fumbles, we could obviously see Rashad Penny get some work. He could maybe lose some touches that way. I don't really have a ton of confidence in either Seattle running back. If I had to choose one, I'd probably go with Rashad Penny because he's $3,000 cheaper, and we just don't know what the splits are going to look like, what the touches are going to look like. If it's going to be a 50-50 even split, I would much rather have Rashad Penny because he's $3,000 cheaper. Plus, they'll use him in the passing game a lot, which is very valuable on DraftKings. I don't see either running back having a ton of success in this matchup or being very efficient. So if I can avoid both Seattle running backs, that's probably what I'll be trying to do. But if I really like my lineup and I got like 5,400 for the last spot, I'm fine plugging Rashad Penny in there because, I mean, he's the preferred guy I do want to go to. But now let's talk about the receivers in this game. So the expensive receivers, you got Stephon Diggs, Tyler Lockett. We do already know that Adam Thielen is going to be out for this game, which is going to open up a ton of targets for Stephon Diggs. He hasn't been targeted as much as I thought he would have been just the last few weeks. I know that Thielen was out in that Week 8 game against Washington. You got a big game from Diggs that week, 7 catches, 143 yards, and a touchdown. I believe Thielen played that Week 9 game against KC and then got hurt early on in the game, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he did play. Yeah, that was the game that Thielen came back. So Thielen came back and played in that KC game, but he got hurt very early on, and then since then he hasn't played. So we're going to get Stephon Diggs playing like 100% of the snaps, if not close to that. I believe in Week 11, or if I'm not mistaken, he played close to that. Yeah, he played 98% of the snaps in Week 11. Stephon Diggs is going to be out there on the field a ton. Seattle doesn't have the good secondary that they used to have. It's a pretty good matchup for Diggs. He makes a lot of sense at 9,800. Choosing between him and Lockett, I think I would prefer prefer Stephon Diggs for just 200 more. Both guys are very solid plays, though. We might see Tyler Lockett come in somewhat low owned because he's been pretty disappointing these last 2 weeks. It was a tough matchup against the 49ers, so I kind of scratched that week. But against the against the Eagles, I was expecting a much better game from Tyler Lockett. He only got 2 targets in that game, 1 catch for 38 yards, which is pretty concerning. But again, it's a one-game showdown slate. Our options are really limited. I'm pretty sure Tyler Lockett plays outside, if I'm not mistaken. So he's going to see Xavier Rhodes, but Xavier Rhodes has not been the elite corner that we've seen in past seasons. He's actually really struggled this year. So it's honestly a pretty good matchup for Tyler Lockett. He's a very fast receiver. He could really burn any corner they put on him. So I like both guys a ton. Just choosing between one, I think I'd rather side with Diggs because I feel like his volume's a little bit more secure and safer with Adam Thielen out. But both guys obviously have a ton of upside, and honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if both guys are in the winning lineup on Monday night. But then you got the cheaper receivers. So you got DK Metcalf for 7,600. I think Metcalf's firmly in play as well. He's been getting more consistent volume just the last few weeks, 9, 10, 6 targets, 30, 12, 6 DraftKings points. Whether he matches up with Xavier Rhodes, it's a good matchup regardless. I do like DK Metcalf quite a bit. I think he's firmly in play at 7,600. I think we definitely need to talk about some of the value, though, that we get from the Vikings receivers. So with Adam Thielen out, that's going to open up Olabisi Johnson. I'm not sure if that's exactly how you say his name, but that's going to open up him playing a ton of snaps. In Week 11 with Adam Thielen out, Johnson played 81% of the snaps. He was on the field a ton. He got targeted 9 times, had 6 catches for 35 yards against Denver. He's only 2,600 on this showdown slate. I'm not sure why he didn't get priced up. He should be like 6K, 7K. He's one of the clear value plays in my opinion. He's going to be probably one of the higher owned receivers or just higher owned players in general, but it's really hard to get away from him with how cheap he is, with how much he's going to be on the field, with also the volume that he should get. So love Johnson as a value receiver from the Vikings. You could definitely look to some of the tight ends as well from the Vikings side. We're going to see Irv Smith and Kyle Rudolph both play a decent amount. If we just look at the Week 11 snap percentage, you had 81% of the snaps played by Irv Smith, 87% by Kyle Rudolph. So you had both those guys on the field a ton. They're going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets. I think they'll line up Smith as a receiver as well. So he's firmly in play, 3,600. He should get at least probably 4 to 5 targets. He did get a touchdown last week against Denver. There's just so much value from the Vikings pass catchers. That's kind of why it's easy to get in the expensive plays at the top. These guys just didn't get priced up. Smith is cheap at 3,600. Johnson's cheap at 2,600. And both of those guys are going to play probably 80% of the snaps, and both should see a good amount of volume for their salary. So that's kind of where I'm looking to for value. I don't see this as being a slate where you need to play the kickers or the defenses because you can get these Vikings pass catchers for so cheap, and they should see good volume as well. Josh Gordon, I'm a little iffy on, so he's played 2 games this year with the Seahawks. I can pull up his snap percentage just so far this season through 2 games. So in Week 12, in Week 12, you got Josh Gordon playing 34% of the snaps. In Week 10, he played 38% of the snaps. He practiced in full this week, so he's not limited or anything. I don't know why they're only playing him 35% of the snaps. Josh Gordon is a very good receiver. They should be lining him out wide a lot and then kind of running Tyler Lockett in the slot. I'm not really sure why they do that, or why they don't do that. Gordon at 4,400, if we could get some clarity on his workload, if he's going to be full 65, 70% of the snaps like he should get, I would have a lot of interest in him because he's so cheap on both sides, or on DraftKings, He's so cheap at 4,400. We just don't know how much he's going to play. He's only played 35% of the snaps the last 2 weeks, 38 and 34. So it's really hard to have have a bunch of confidence in him or have much clarity, but he practiced in full, which means he's not limited by any means. There's no injury. He practiced in full on Friday with that ankle injury that he's had. So he shouldn't be limited. It's just hard to tell what the Seahawks are going to do, what Pete Carroll's going to do. So for that reason, I'm a little bit iffy on Josh Gordon, but if you got 4,400 in your lineup, he's probably going to be really low owned because his game log isn't pretty and because he's not on the field a ton. But Josh Gordon is still such a talented receiver. Even if he plays 50% of the snaps and gets targeted 4 times, he could still go for 2 touchdowns, especially if they target him in the red zone. So I'm fine plugging in Josh Gordon. I mean, he's not a great value play by any means. Like these Vikings cheap receivers are much safer, but Gordon at least gives you the upside because of how talented a receiver he is. Plus, he's got Russell Wilson throwing the ball to him. But now we'll talk about the tight ends real quick before we look at some roster construction, talk about some lineup builds. So you got Jacob Hollister for $4,800 from the Seahawks side. You got Kyle Rudolph for $6,600. You also have Irv Smith, who I like as well, at $3,600. Honestly, I like all the tight ends in this game. I prefer to go to the cheaper ones, so I prefer Hollister at $4,800, Smith at $3,600. Kyle Rudolph, though, I mean, he's going to get targeted as well. He did call a touchdown last week against Denver. He caught 2 touchdowns in that game against Dallas. They've been targeting him a lot in the red zone with Adam Thielen out. He's been getting consistent volume as well. 5 targets in 2 straight games with Thielen out. He's put up 19 and 17 DK points. I mean, he's going to be very touchdown dependent. Like, you're not going to get a 15, 16-point game from Rudolph unless he scores a touchdown. It's not like he's going to get 6 catches for 80 yards or something. You're just not going to get that from Rudolph. So if you want to take a shot on him, he's fine. But I think these cheaper guys like Jacob Hollister, $4,800, who's also been playing a lot of snaps recently, he's pretty much been the tight end number 1 with Will Dissly out. They also lost another tight end. I can't remember his name, but Jacob Hollister has pretty much taken over like the Will Dissly role. He's played just the last 3 weeks. He's played 80, 78, and 69% of the snaps. He's been getting targeted a lot as well, 6, 10, and 4 targets the last 3 weeks. He's been a good threat in the red zone. He caught 2 touchdowns against Tampa Bay, 1 touchdown against San Francisco. Luke Wilson was the tight end that they lost. So they lost Will Dissly and they lost Luke Wilson, which has opened up a lot of playing time for Jacob Hollister. So he's a good value. He's much safer than Josh Gordon. Just talking between those two guys, I feel much safer with Hollister, but obviously you're going to get Hollister much higher owned than Josh Gordon, I would imagine. And then you got Irv Smith, who I like as well. Irv Smith I expect to play a lot. He's probably going to play 70 to 80% of the snaps. He should get targeted as well. It's pretty much going to be him, Rudolph, Johnson, and Diggs getting most of the volume, just in terms of like the Vikings pass catchers. He's $3,600. He's really, really cheap. Definitely makes sense as a value as well. But I think we pretty much covered like all the guys that I'm going to be targeting just in terms of like guys that I think are playable. I mean, you have like these really cheap Seattle receivers. They're probably going to play 35, 40% of the snaps, but it's just hard to trust these guys like David Moore. Rarely does he see more than 4 targets a week. He just doesn't give you a lot of upside. You're going to need him to score a touchdown in order to even be a good play. Same can be said with like Jerron Brown, who just doesn't get targeted much. Hard for me to have much confidence in any of these cheap plays. Plus, I mean, we got Johnson for cheap, Smith for cheap. These guys just project so well for their salaries. So let's go ahead and talk about roster construction real quick before we end the video. So I think it's going to be pretty easy to build a Dalvin Cook lineup at captain. So let's definitely plug him at captain. Start off with those values we like. I think Johnson's my favorite value, so we'll start off with him at $2,600. If we want to plug in multiple values, though, if we want to go with like a stars and scrubs lineup, I think that makes plenty of sense. I usually try and get at least one of the quarterbacks in my lineup. Since I got Cook at captain, if Cook has a big game and goes for like 2 rushing touchdowns, that probably means that the Vikings are ahead and that maybe Seattle is trailing, just in terms of game script. So I do prefer Russell Wilson anyway, but with Cook at captain, I think I want to get exposure to the other side. So we'll go with Russell Wilson at quarterback, going with Cook at captain, Wilson at QB, and then Johnson as a cheap receiver at $2,600 leaves you $6,300 remaining per player. So there's a lot of ways that we could go with the rest of those 3 spots. We could go with like 2 cheap guys, whether it's Hollister and Smith, or if we want to take a shot on Josh Gordon, we could do that. So maybe that we can pay up for Diggs or Lockett. I don't think we'll be able to get both Diggs and Lockett. Yeah, we're not going to be able to get both, but we can definitely get exposure to one of the 2. Like I said earlier in the video, I prefer Diggs if I'm just choosing between one of the 2. That leaves me $9,100 remaining salary, $4,550 remaining per player. So we could go to Irv Smith for cheap at $3,600, and that would leave us enough to play Rashad Penny at $5,400. So that's a lineup that I like quite a bit. Obviously, you can make some tweaks to this, like you could take out Russell Wilson and play Kirk Cousins. Then maybe you could upgrade at some other spot. I feel like you probably got too much exposure to the Minnesota side, though. I mean, you don't want 5 Minnesota guys and only 1 Seattle. That just doesn't feel right. So I would take out probably Smith and then maybe get some exposure to the Seattle side with like Jacob Hollister. But I do prefer to play, like, if I'm only making one lineup, I would try and get Russell Wilson in there over Kirk Cousins. I mentioned how much I like Johnson as a value. I think Hollister's a really good value. Penny's definitely a fine like tournament play. He should give you some upside, and he's going to be relatively low owned. But honestly, if I'm just starting like one lineup, if I'm just playing one lineup, this is probably where I start Cook at captain, Wilson at QB, and then Johnson as a value, and then just kind of fill out the 3 spots. Maybe if you're playing multiple lineups, you kind of like lock in these 3 guys and then kind of just construct your other lineups however you want to, just make different pivots. But I mean, you could probably play both quarterbacks if you wanted to. You could go Wilson and Cousins. That would leave you 49.50, so you could take a shot on Josh Gordon, which would leave you enough to play Penny. You could play Jacob Hollister. That would leave you enough to play either Gordon, or even you could go down to Irv Smith and leave some salary on the table, so that way you have more of a contrarian lineup. There's a lot of ways you can construct your lineups for these Showdown slates. Usually I never play one lineup. I always try and play like multiple lineups on these Showdown slates just because of how much variance there is. Like if you have a guy, if there's a chalky guy that scores a touchdown and you don't have him in your one lineup, you're probably done. So I like to try and play multiple lineups. If I was only playing one lineup though, this is probably how I would start my one lineup build. But my favorite route to go is to definitely play Cook at captain because of the value that we have. If you want to go to someone else at captain though, I mean that makes plenty of sense. Like Stephon Diggs makes plenty of sense at captain. If I'm playing him at captain, I want to have Kirk Cousins in those lineups because I want to correlate my lineups that way. Playing Diggs at captain should save you a little bit of salary. You should still be able to get Cook in there if you want to. You could definitely fade Cook though and go to like Wilson and Lockett. Just kind of get exposure to like all the passing like usage from both sides. Plug in Irv Smith as a value at 2,600. That leaves you enough to play the Seahawks defense, which obviously I'm like not the biggest fan of. I think there's better value, but if you want to go that route, you could. Maybe you could take out Russell Wilson or take out Tyler Lockett and maybe drop down to DK Metcalf. That would leave you enough to get up to Jacob Hollister, which is also a fine route to go. Obviously, that's like scary to not have exposure to Dalvin Cook. I want to get as much exposure to Cook as I can because I just think he has so much upside. But that's definitely a build that I like. You got both quarterbacks. You got pass catchers that should all see relatively good volume for their salaries. So I don't think Cook's like a must, but if I was playing one lineup, I'd try and get him in there if possible. He's definitely my favorite play on this Showdown slate just because of the upside that he gives you. But I think that's just how I'm looking to approach this Showdown slate, guys. This is just sort of like my quick rundown. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I will have more up-to-date, in-depth content over on Patreon for this Showdown slate. I'll have a written article that I'll write myself. I'll try and get it posted around 4 or 5 o'clock Eastern time on Monday in the afternoon, late Monday afternoon. Definitely want to get it up at least a couple hours before the game starts. So if you want to get access to that article and all my other NFL content, check out my Patreon. Link is down in the description. I will have NBA content as well. So for those of you that do play NBA DFS and that watch my NBA videos, there will be packages where you can get NBA and NFL together for a cheaper price than what you would normally pay. So just check out all the content I have over there. Check the link down in the description. You can see it for yourself. But anyways, guys, I think that's pretty much it for the video. Make sure to drop a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you are new. Follow me on Twitter if you haven't yet. And good luck tonight on this Showdown slate. Peace.